I haven't uploaded a full video here in a while. 10th edition points just dropped today, as did the rules throughout the week, and I am generally really excited. It's been a little while that I've just not been making Warhammer content here. I'll explain that real quickly first, and then we'll talk about my feeling about 10th edition going into it now and where we're at in Warhammer. Really briefly, the reason I haven't really uploaded to here is because I had a baby, if you didn't know, and I had to put some things on the back burner so I could focus on, well, having a baby as well as getting the main channel back to some semblance of where it was at. I had to take a month off, you know, paternity leave. I didn't get paid for that, and no one else does the work for me. It's just, I am a one-man band. And then they announced 10th edition, so 9th edition kind of got boring. 2 of my local tournaments didn't fire because no one could be bothered to play, and thus we are here now at 10th edition. A few months on, Leviathan lands a week from this video coming out, and the points and the rules drop this week. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about what I'm excited for, and also 5 changes to Warhammer going from 9th to 10th that you need to be aware of going forward. Of course, we're in a whole new edition, but the rules haven't changed that much. Firstly, let's talk about change number 1, free rules. The indexes are up on the main website, as are the points, as are the core rules. It's all on the website. Something I've been asking for so long was for Games Workshop to focus primarily on giving us rules and let us buy these wonderful models, as opposed to selling us books that'll be outdated very quickly. Ironically, some things have already been found that are broken and have released the rules this week, and they've had to rewilder some stuff for like Death Watch and perhaps, at time of recording, not for Eldar, but for Death Watch for certain, meaning the digital cards that are going to be physically buyable in shops are now out of date. I was going to pick up some data cards for some of the armies that I'm playing at events, whether that be Blood Angels, Demons, Sisters or Custodians or whatever I end up playing at my first thing, maybe Orcs. I was going to pick up the data cards, but if they're out of date, I probably won't. They probably should have released these and then gave us a few months for them to print the product once we've like play tested for them. I mean, a massive company like this out play testing with the public isn't ideal, but it's better than things being out of date. Ultimately though, them updating these free rules immediately when they find an issue is fine by me. I'd rather a live game that becomes balanced and fun as opposed to being imbalanced and bollocks. But with Index Hammer comes another caveat. It's that everyone is now reset to a base level. And with that comes some issues, because that means that people who bought the World Eaters book, like myself, or people who, well, actually no, sorry, I'll rephrase that. People who bought into World Eaters, I bought parts of the army. Angron, I will finish painting you one day. I actually bought this model the day my daughter was born. We had a long period in the hospital, we weren't doing much, so I popped out to get some lunch for me and my wife, and I bought an Angron. But people who bought the World Eaters or the Imperial Guard book got less than 6 months out of it, and that does fucking suck, and it's difficult to really find an alternative to that. But on the upside, there's a lot more positives than negatives. Most people were waiting for their new book in a way. Marines had their book for like 2 years at that point. And also Index Hammer puts everyone on the same playing field in theory. There's none of this like conflicting power creep of earlier books to later books. We are now all on the same field for the beginning of 10th edition, which I think is a great place to be. Honestly, the changes that I'm talking about in this video, I'm excited for like 4 out of the 5 of them. I think they're great. The core rules of the game remain the same. You take your turn and move through phases, moving things around and shooting and charging and fighting. You roll dice to hit, you roll dice to wound, you roll dice for saves, and you'll be rolling more of those saves than you used to be, because armor penetration is taking a hit this edition. Armor pen has been shrunk. The armor pen creep that we saw in 8th and into 9th edition, where having an armor save practically didn't matter because everything was AP4 or AP5, doesn't matter anymore. Because, I say doesn't matter anymore, sorry, has been rectified, but everything's been shrunk down. In some ways, if a unit in your army now has AP1, it's probably better than it once was, because AP is a bit more sparse and a bit more sparingly used now. Another addition to this change that we found out today is that all war gear is free. This is the points for Sisters of Battle on the screen right now. A squad of 10 girls is 110 points, and that includes whatever heavy weapon, special weapon, weapon on the sergeant, and upgrades for the sergeant, and whatever cherub or banner that we put on the unit. I only own 1 girl holding a banner, and I'm probably going to play between 4 and 5 girl squads. So if I want to play them at a tournament, I'm going to have to build some more sisters. Free war gear is super simple. It makes the game kind of elegant almost. You just pop your stuff into the army and you're done. The downside is that a load of stuff's going to be modelled weirdly, or in my case, for example, I didn't model the banners because they always cost points and always gave away your position, which I guess they still do now if you see them over a chest-high wall. People would have modelled a load of units in the past to have the most basic gun to lower their point cost to make them efficient, and now you can play whatever you want. So there is a downside to that, but ultimately I still think the positives outweigh the negatives there. Basically, nothing's hunky-dory, they did a great job, but nothing's super bad, they're the evilest company in the world. It seems like when it comes to change, there are positives and there are negatives. The next change, as you might have noticed from the phases, is there's no psychic. Or should I say there's no psychic phase? Instead of now having an entire phase, which some armies don't partake in, like the Votan did, didn't they? Who's not a psychic army? The World Eaters, who was one that wasn't released recently? The custodes. Some armies just don't cast spells in the Psychic phase, other armies did. Some armies had a fucking all their cake and ate it. Thousand Sons and Eldar just fucking about for like 15 minutes where you just stood there glazing over with fear and disgust and wondering what you're doing with your life playing War Barbies when you could be out in the sun getting a tan or some shit. But now Psychic are abilities on the data sheets and there are weapons in your weapon profile and you just use them. There are some things that have like anti-psyker or mortal wound protection from psychers and stuff like that. Some things that interact with the Psychic keyword, but on the whole, they're now just in the sheet and used in the movement phase, the shooting phase, or whatever phase makes sense for them to be used in the fight phase, for example. I like the change in terms of simplifying the game because the game was too complicated. And I'll be honest, the whole idea that this game is a simplified version with 10th edition is largely not true. The game is still horribly complicated, but I think this change on the whole was good. There is an element of a lot of armies that their identity was like defined in the Psychic phase, Grey Knights, Thousand Sons, to a lesser extent Eldar and Tyranids. They now have their identity like lessened somewhat, but I think ultimately it's good for the game for the most part. And I guess I'll mention here that all weapons now have their to hit baked into them as opposed to being on the character sheet themselves, which means, for example, a big boss on Squiggosaur, his squig hits on a different stat to what his normal weapon does because the squig is less accurate. Instead of having to write in this hits on a -1 into the line to give us more text to read and more things to follow, it's simplified down to this weapon hits on a 3, this weapon hits on a 4, taken from AOS. But they decided not to take the wounds on a X or wounds on a Y, instead keeping strength and toughness, which I much prefer. I'm really glad they took this route. I was very scared we were getting too simplified like AOS. I like strength and toughness. On that note, let's talk about the next fundamental change, the change to the granularity of toughness. Previously, the largest toughness you get in the game was T8 for the most part. A few things went to T9, like the Exalted or Forge World Great Unclean one, but most things, oh shit, I shouldn't mention Forge World. Is it too soon? But most things were T8. Now you can go up to T16 if you're a Warlord Titan, or T13 or 14 for some of the Knight-like models like the Orc Stomper getting T14. This change allows for granularity. What I mean is you can define things on a much lower scale, like the grains of sand. So for example, it used to be up to T8 and then weapons went to like T6, strength 16 for some reason. Now they both go that way. It means like a strength 8 gun doesn't wound most vehicles on 4s or 3s. Instead it wounds most vehicles on 5s. What this allows for there to be is like a more both thematic and gameplay balancing range for it. So a Custodian Guard now is a toughness 6 model. They gain 1 point in toughness. So now a Marine is T4, an Orc Boy is T5, and a Custodian is toughness 7. No, 6, sorry. A Custodian Terminator is T7. And this allows you to show the difference in toughness of units in a wider range. And not only on a flavorful and fluffy perspective, they also have it on a balancing perspective. Now I can't just spam 22 melter guns and kill anything in the game like I was doing with Sisters to an extent. My melter guns are going to be far less effective. In some ways it actually changes how Sisters dynamic into tougher models goes, when we have to use, probably again, kind of spamming actually, a point barrage or low point cost barrage of melter fire. Actually, it's probably the same for Sisters. Anyway, because they don't have las cannons, they only have some like heavy weapons on the Exorcist and the Castigator. What I'm getting at is you have more room to fine-tune weapons and things like that. And we're seeing this with las cannons being upped in power. The las cannon is now a higher power level. Strength level, I should say. I would have liked it if they'd like lent into this more, so that your average human was T2, for example, a peak physical guy like a Katachan T3, Marine T4. Instead, all humans are still T3, but in some ways I actually respect the idea of opening up the fine-tuning granularity of having higher toughness values in the game without widening everything out and dispersing everything out across that range, because now the game still feels fundamentally like it used to, but with this new space for vehicles. I think ultimately that's probably the right way to go, and my way would be too much change, and we all know people hate change. Rhinos and Land Raiders now have like significantly tougher looking bodies. A Land Raider being a T12 model with all these wounds and a 2-up save that can get cover, by the way, more on that in a moment, is real impressive. And on the topic of weapons, let's talk about the next change. Are we on change 3 or 4? I'm losing track. Let's talk about universal special rules. Weapons now have these universal special rules. They're not calling it that, but that's what it used to be called in like 6th or 7th, and it's called that in Horus Heresy. These keywords mean things. Twin linked means you can reroll the wound roll, whilst devastating wounds means your opponent's probably going to get a bit salty out of frustration at some point in this game. A lot of things like devastating wounds or sustained hits or whatever proc on critical hits or critical wounds. Basically, rolls of a 6. If you roll a dice and you hit a 6, you've critically hit, and on a sustained hit keyword, that gives you an extra hit, or an exploding hit as we used to call it. I wish they called it exploding hits. Some things allow you to even crit on a 5 or a 4, but I won't get too much into that. That's on the different armies and what they can do. There are a load of keywords, there's too many of them to go through in this video, and that's not what this video is about. And they're all there, linked in the description below in the free rules that they put out because they gave us free rules. Games Workshop, I know I'm critical of big companies quite a bit because I really want to be a consumer advocate, but I think this is absolutely a step in the right direction. I personally find Universal Special Rules very difficult to learn. I find it very hard to learn the names of things. People, abilities, places, characters. I have a difficulty with that because just the way I'm programmed, the way I'm built. But it does give you a language to communicate with your opponents. So if you say this has sustained hits 1, once you learn it, you know what that is and your opponent knows what it is. Keywording stuff is great. Weirdly, on the data cards, some units have the exact same ability as another unit, but it's called something else flavorfully different, which has kind of meant that they've only gone halfway towards universally special ruling stuff. It's only really on the top ability bar, like deep striking and scout moves all being the same thing, and on the weapons. On the actual like bespoke abilities that can be the same across armies, they aren't. You know, they almost did it. There's even just a keyworded fights first ability, which is wonderful. Exactly how that works, I haven't got my head completely around with charging and stuff, because I haven't played my first game. I'm playing my first game 4 hours after this video is recorded. I'm excited. But there's 2 keywords we should unpack here, leader and lone operative. Let's do lone operative first because it's easy. It's the new lookout, sir. Basically, if you're not within a certain distance, I think it's 12 inches. I didn't write in my fucking notes to an idiot. I think it's 12 inches. If you're not within 12 inches, you can't shoot them. You can't pick out a officer or a lieutenant or a captain in the humdrum of battle, unless you're close up. This will be a very important keyword. Some things don't have it. The Lord Discordant is missing it. Ghazghkull Thraka is missing it, which means those things are free range to get shot the fuck out of if they're not attached to a unit. The Lord Discordant can't be attached to a unit. Gaz can. And that brings me to the leader keyword. Leader allows you to put one of your heroes, characters, or whatever onto a unit. They attach to it. This is not an unfamiliar concept to people who played Warhammer in the past. I remember doing that as a kid in 3rd edition, I think it was, or 2nd edition, and you could do it in other editions too, and Horus Heresy still allows it too. What this allows characters to do now is have buffs that specifically go onto the unit they're attached to, and it allows for like a fine tuning of balance. Instead of you having overlapping 7 auras that turn your thing into a castle that is in like you can't interact with, instead a hero is attached to a leader character, is attached to a unit and gives it that particular ability. They don't give it to another unit. There are rare examples of auras still existing, which is cool. I think that should exist in some capacity. It's not a bad mechanic, but I think in cutting down on auras to give more specific buffs to units is a better way to fine-tune the balance, because you can decide what that leader can attach to, what that unit does itself, and so on and so on. On top of that, some units give abilities to everything in the unit, including the hero joining. So for example, Gaz can attach to Mega Knobs that give devastating wounds, which is a great keyword that turns damage into mortal wounds with no save, and I think Gaz is going to be a lot of fun if not competitively viable. Importantly, this is a meat shield unit. You have to kill through, allocate damage and attacks to the bodyguard, as it's described, unit before you get to the character. You can never have more than 2 leaders on one unit. Most of the time it's just 1, but some things like apothecaries can attach to units that already have commanders. It's quite straightforward. Attach 1 leader to a unit it says it can. In this case, you can attach things with similar gear loadout. So jump pack to jump pack, Gravis to Gravis, Terminator to Terminator. Weirdly, Firstborn and Primaris can intermix. You can have a Firstborn captain on bike with a power fist and a combi weapon driving along with an Outrider squad with an ATV attached to that. Oh, it is fucking cool. These characters cannot detach, and they cannot move on to another unit once that unit is dead. It's not like Heresy in that regard. Although it allows fine-tuning, there are going to be combos that are broken. Mikey from Healthstone Wargaming and Auspex Tactics have both done videos already on broken combos that already exist. I think the Deathwatch one being patched already, well the Space Marine one is not patched because it's not broken, but it seems a bit too good. Some things are going to be broken because Games Workshop is a small indie developer, and they're not. That's sarcastic, but they don't have a huge team. And I think ultimately, I just want to say this right here and now, and I might do a full video on this, I think that's okay. Don't get me wrong, I've been frustrated in the past when a book comes out, it just fucking ruins competitive 40k, but the game is more than comp 40k. There are casual tables throughout the land playing playing match play, but they're not playing a tournament as such. And there's going to be teething troubles when you update a lot of things in such a complicated game. I do think as each book comes out, they should have a much better grasp on what's going on. But when you drop this many indexes and a whole new rule system, there is bound to be some teething issues. And it's okay to update things. I think as well, if they continue giving us free rules updates and Minister and field notes and core rule updates that have version numbers on them, because the points have a V1.0 on them. If they give version numbers too, they can update everything regularly on the website and keep things neat and tidy. The issue comes with the release of physical products, but we're not like fucking strangers to codexes being out of date the moment you buy them, are we? It's a problem, but it's not. It's a problem. It's a minor problem I don't really give a fuck about. I'd rather a game that's balanced and fun. And by balanced, I mean mildly balanced. There's going to be always a best deck, a best army. And there are a few other changes that I'm going to mention but not go into in great detail. Terrain has all changed significantly. As a little note, I genuinely believe the 9th edition terrain was fantastic. It was badly written and difficult to grok and understand, but once you got it, it just worked. It was functional. You had keywords like obscuring, light cover, heavy cover, dense, that attached to objects on the table, often in groups with like ruins have these 4, for example. It wasn't those 4, but some 4, and then you just have that. So the tournament pack with your mate, like, oh, should we count that as dense and light cover? Sure. Got it. Easy. Now every terrain piece has a header name like ruins, and that has sub-rules that I still haven't got my head around at the moment. And I think that is such a backwards, and by backwards I mean a back step towards what we don't need. The keywords before worked if they were explained a little better. Beyond that, some of the terrain rules have changed to include wholly within, not wholly within, and line of sight and shit. So now, if a tank is touching onto a terrain piece, it can't fire through it anymore, but it can be shot at. This might be a balancing element to T12 tanks dominating the metagame to give infantry a chance. I don't know if it is. Check out Mikey Hellstorm Wargaming's video on that as well. I'll put that on screen now, this video. Check that out, because he goes into it in good detail, and I wonder if that's really how we want the game to be. Further to that, there are just more and more micro changes that will take time to adjust to. The one that I think is going to really fuck with me, as someone who played a lot of demons, orcs, and blood angels in my past, in the last edition, is charging. Now when you charge, you must end in base contact if you can. This means some units in the back can't like end their charge behind one of your units and leave a gap for other units to come in if their charge could have put them in base contact. It's a weird one where you can try and body block your own unit, but then you're body blocking the second unit anyway. Multi-charging has got a bit more complicated because of this. Alongside terrain rules, there's now no dents, so you don't get -1 to hit when shooting through woodland, but if you can't see a whole model, they tend to get +1 to their save as light cover. That's quite clean. It's more the rules around being in and out of terrain to get the stuff that I think is a bit messy. So those are my big changes to Warhammer 40k that you need to know about. The biggest change being that you now have an index on the official website that's linked down below. You don't need to rush out and buy a codex. If you are new to this or don't think you have a full understanding of 10th edition right now, and I'm learning too, comment down below. I'll respond to some of it. Hopefully we'll respond to each other, and together we can learn this game. As I get into 10th edition, as I get to get out to another tournament, as I get to paint more models, and get back more into 40k, as we get into a new edition, I'm going to be making more videos on this channel. I'm going to aim for 1 a week minimum, but there might be more, and on occasion there might be less. But subscribe in the meantime if you want to see more stuff from me. I've been Vince, also known as Pleasant Kirby on the internet. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the fields of battle. That was cringe. I should never say that. Ta-ta for now.